First and foremost, what we see happening out there today is that sustainability is being considered more strategically. It's not now just a collection of practices, but really a governance model, a way of doing business. We also see that there's greater focus now on the triple bottom line, on economic and social issues, not just energy conservation, recycling, and the environment. We see stakeholders having a greater influence over the direction that companies are taking, whether it's with regard to innovation or with regard to their general operations. And we see companies beginning to embrace that, see true value in it, and actually go out and seek engagement with these stakeholders, not just with regard to the activists, but with governments, advocacy, consumers, their employees as well. And as globalization takes place, we can see that the approach companies are taking towards sustainability obviously is becoming more global. And finally, the interesting thing that's happening is after many years of wandering in the woods, this broad general misunderstanding about what sustainability entails, we're beginning to see that there are forums that are occurring where you have global multi-stakeholder processes trying to reach a definition and understanding of what sustainability really means, so that companies that say, I want to be sustainable, now have some place to go to see what that entails. One of the things we see as we look across some 24 definitions of sustainability is that they seem to have some common elements. I call it the 2 R's. First of all, there's respect. All of these definitions seem in some way to talk about respect for people and other living things. But they also cover resources, the wise use and management of economic and natural resources. So those are 2 main themes that you see being embraced by many of these definitions. And for what purpose? Why do you embrace resources and respect? It's for the purpose of sustaining and promoting the long-term well-being. Okay, you sign up, you say, I want to be a sustainable company. What do we expect you to do? And we started with what I call implied expectations. Where do we get implied expectations? We get them by looking at sustainability CSR reports. So every company that's doing a CSR report may be expected to report on hazardous waste, for example. But there's an implied expectation behind that. Why do you report on hazardous waste? Is it because you want to amuse people with your colorful charts? Or is it because stakeholders expect something of you? And it's that expectation that we need to determine. And that expectation in this case is, over time, stakeholders want to see that you're reducing your environmental footprint around your hazardous waste and you're properly managing your risks. But we're also seeing that articulated in a host of voluntary standards. You can go back to the Earth Charter and see the broad expectations of society. But now what we're seeing is more focus on individual organizations. We started with the Global Compact. We see it with the own ethos indicators is a great example. But more recently, we've been working with ethos, and I've been representing GRI in the discussions around ISO 26000. How many of you heard of that? It's a new social responsibility standard be coming out at the end of this year. What we're beginning to see is an emergence of mandatory reporting standards, coupling financial reporting as well as social and environmental reporting. We see that certainly a great example is in South America with their King 3 standard, but we're also seeing it emerge in a number of countries in Europe. And then finally, what we're beginning to see is this engagement, as I talked about, where you're actually going out, you're seeing individual companies better understanding what their specific obligations are by talking to their own individual stakeholders. And so this is really a new evolution in the whole process of understanding what sustainability means. In fact, we've done a comparison document that shows GRI requirements or provisions linked up with the new ISO provisions. And the interesting thing that we see there is that in both documents, both standards and guidelines, the same coverage exists in many regards. So for example, both GRI and sustainability and ISO and social responsibility cover governance, they cover human rights, they cover labor practices, environmental issues, fair operating practices, consumer issues, as well as community involvement and development. There's one key difference, and that's the last item. The last item is not expressly covered under ISO's social responsibility definition or concept, but it is covered under GRI's sustainability concept. So we're starting to see a general consensus, and these are both formed through extensive multi-year global multi-stakeholder processes. You're seeing this consensus starting to form about what sustainability really means, what the obligations are of companies and other organizations that raise their hand and say, I want to be sustainable. So people say, yeah, I want this green product, I consider that sustainable. But there's another element that's coming along as well, and it's this one. It's not just that you have to have a product that reduces environmental impacts, provides more efficient use of natural resources, but you also at the same time must have a product that provides greater respect and accommodations for the needs of people and other living things along the product life cycle. So what does that mean? It means you have to have a product that's safe for the consumer. You have to have a product that's not made in a sweatshop. So it's this element, this social element, the people element, that's working its way into the definition of sustainable products. I often ask people, tell me, if you've got let's talk about a green product. Do you consider a product green if it's environmentally attractive, but it's made in a sweatshop? And people often say, well, no. And so even the concept of green is beginning to take on social connotations. So this is how this concept seems to be evolving. Now, if you look at what companies are doing, those that are leading in this area, you see that there's sort of a common framework, and this is a framework I wanted to discuss with you. I call it a sustainable operating system. One of the things we see is that in this model, you have drivers. In other words, an organization doesn't move forward unless somebody is pushing it. And so you have to have a champion, you have to have top management support from your CEO. You have to have a message that says, here's why sustainability is important and why we should be doing this. And then you have to have accountability so that there are rewards and penalties to encourage people within the organization to move in a more sustainable way. You also need to set the framework. You have to enable the organization by having the right structure, the right organization, the right people in the right positions to do sustainability and to approach sustainability. And you have to make sure you're rolling out these programs, you're deploying them, you're integrating them in a way that makes sense, because often there are many good ideas in corporations. They often fail in the implementation stage. They're not properly executed. But of course, it's not enough to have the drivers and the structure. You need to have an understanding of where you're going, the pathway ahead. And so you need to have some vision, hopefully a policy that says this is what we really are signing up for, this is what we really want to do as part of our sustainability initiative. You have to have a process for continual improvement, a system, if you will. And then you have to have some way of prioritizing, because there's 1,001 things that you can do under the sustainability umbrella. But it's critical that you pick the things where you can have the most impact, both on society and for your organization. So it has to be some strategic planning, some prioritization process. And finally, you need to have a way of evaluating your progress, whether it's indicators and goals, measuring and reporting, hopefully a GRI report. Ethos tool is a great example there as well. And of course, the all-important stakeholder engagement, so you see yourselves as others see you. So it's this kind of process which, repeated over the years, moves you closer to sustainability. And it's this kind of format or framework that many of the leading companies are using today to move in that direction.